Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar. Before we get started, we want to give any stragglers just a chance to join. In the meantime, I want to draw your attention to the different engagement tools that we have for you this evening. We have the purple Q&A widget. That is a means for you to communicate with this evening's presenters. So if you have a question about anything that's being discussed today, please feel free to submit your question to the presenters in the Q&A. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can submit your questions there as well. The green button is access to all of your resources for the evening. So any resources that are mentioned throughout this evening's presentation, you can access them through the resources. And the blue button is for group chat. Feel free to introduce yourself to all of the attendees and your colleagues this evening through the group chat and reach out to your network, and we'll be right with you in a minute. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar, Reading Practice in a Time of Remote Learning. My name is Pascal Joseph. I am a project coordinator with the Tools and Classroom Resources at Student Achievement Partners. And I'd like to introduce this evening's presenters. We have Meredith Lieben, David Lieben, Jody Guarino, Katie Key Thomas, Dwayne Cox, and Megan Merritt. So before we get started, we'd just like to find out from all of the attendees, how many Core Advocate webinars have you attended? This could be your first one or maybe it's your 20th one. Let us know. Wow, we have a lot of first-timers this evening. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Please feel free to join our network. You can access our National Core Advocate Network using this link here on this page. The Core Advocate Network is a means for you to reach out to different colleagues, grow your professional network, and also find a potential for new opportunities, including consultant work or even helping with different research opportunities. If you want to learn more about Student Achievement Partners, feel free to contact Jenny Beltramini or Joy DeLizo Osborne. And you can also complete this survey to sign up for our mailing list and our database. Or tweet us, especially during this evening, during the presentation, using hashtag #CoreAdvocates. We also have some of our presenters' Twitter handles here, so please feel free to reach out to both SAP as well as our presenters this evening. And as a reminder, the different tools that you can use to engage with us this evening, we have the purple Q&A widget, questions just for the presenters or any technical help. We have the green button that is for your resources. And we have the blue button that is for group chat so that all of the attendees could talk amongst themselves. So the goals for this evening's webinar: consider why a reading practice routine during distance learning, develop a vision of what a 5-day reading practice routine looks like and sounds like in a distance learning setting, understand the affordances of a reading practice routine from different perspectives, and evaluate resources for implementation in your context. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our first speakers for the evening, Meredith and David Lieben.
Hi, everybody. This slide basically says it all. We're really excited about this resource because it really, in a way that provides for every contingency, brings a really doable and practical and vitally important resource home to families and to students that are at home, and it scales up and down the elementary grade really beautifully. So we have been long proponents of reading fluency as one of the key ways to solidify and cement student foundational skills learning. And we did this religiously in the school that David and I started with our second grade. That was sort of the fluency alley. And we had these wonderful celebrations where kids were brought into public speaking through their reading fluency passages. And that there's a component of that you'll see tonight. There's a beautiful transformation of the Achieve the Core resources and any fluency material you want to give your own students. And just a reminder, since I do lots of work with publishing, is that publishers have lowered any kind of barrier to reproducing materials for students at home. You will not. Nobody's liable for making copies, paper copies, or distributing in video format or any way, anything that you can get your hands on for your kids. So the sky's the limit in terms of using really fun, charming material that your students would love and that their parents could help them with at home. So materials hopefully won't be an obstacle. The challenge is figuring out how to get them to your kiddos, and that is what tonight's presenters have really beautifully figured out and are about to present. So I don't want to take any more of their time. Over to you, David.
Hi, everybody. Fluency is a marvelous construct because it combines so many different things to make children a better reader. For one thing, as you're looking at words and as you're hearing them, you see and hear the various different phonics patterns that go into word recognition. So if you hear the AI sound, as in paid, and you hear it multiple times, then you see it and you hear it, and you learn that AI makes an A sound. Or if you hear OR, as in more, and you hear it and you see it, then you start to learn that OR pronounces OR, as in this case, an R-controlled vowel. So you're learning phonics patterns, but there's more, because you're also learning to deal with syntax. You're seeing how the text is read with a longer sentence and how it's read with a shorter sentence. And there's still more. You're learning about prosody, or reading expression, because you see how the reader of the text pauses within the sentence based on phrase boundaries, and also across the sentence based on sentence boundaries. So you get all of that, and the research overwhelmingly says that multiple readings produce proficiency in all of those areas. But the great thing about this webinar and this approach from the people who thought about it, not me, is that this will work in children whose living room looks like NASA headquarters, and it'll also work in less fortunate children who all they have is, at the most, one phone. Right now, as far as we see, there's almost nothing that covers the ground as nicely as that. So this is a really good event. I'll stop talking, and I'll say welcome to all of you, and goodbye.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here with you tonight to talk about why a reading practice routine during the time of distance learning. My name is Jody Garino, and I am a lecturer at UC Irvine and a math coordinator actually at the Orange County Department of Education. And having spent more than 15 years teaching kids to read as an elementary teacher, as well as being a parent of 3, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks trying to figure out how to support kids to continue reading and to become proficient readers while we're in this new distance learning space. So the work that we're going to share was developed by Katie, who you will hear from tonight, myself, and a group of UCI graduate students, really thinking about equity and access. And I'm going to start by talking kind of about our why. So teaching reading in ways guided by research wasn't really new to us. However, to many of us, distance learning is completely new. So we've gone from having 6 hours a day with students to now far more limited interaction. In some spaces, we do interact with kids every day, and in other spaces, we're really relying on packets or phone calls. So in the time and space that we do have, what do we prioritize? So we thought a lot about reading and really making reading at the top of our list. So we were asking ourselves, how do we develop a professional vision of what this looks and sounds like? What tools do we and our students have access to? What might this look like across a variety of platforms? Many teachers are using platforms like Zoom to connect with students in a synchronous environment, but time on Zoom is often limited. So how do we decide what to do in a synchronous environment, such as Zoom, and what can be done on other platforms? There are also many students that don't have access to synchronous spaces, so how do we create learning opportunities for them grounded in the same research and learning principles? That's really what we set out to do. We know there's also children and families with limited access to texts, and even more specific, limited access to text that they can read. With schools and libraries being closed, for some children, the only access they might have are to texts that we're sharing with them or pushing out to them. We also thought a lot about the technology access, whether that's access to devices or connectivity. And our goal was to think about and provide opportunities across 3 distinct learning platforms to ensure that all students have access. So not just thinking about access to technology, which are many conversations we're all engaging in, but also thinking about access to content, access to standards, access to reading practice. We use instructional routines in our classrooms, and so we asked ourselves, what does it look like to use or implement instructional routines in distance learning, and what are the affordances of that? So in a time where very little is routine or normal, how can we rely upon structures to relieve the stress on ourselves, students, families, while still ensuring students engage in the learning opportunities we know they need to become proficient readers? As David was mentioning earlier, we know students need to hear models of fluent reading, practice decoding, engage in repeated readings of text. In the routine that we developed, students engage in all of these experiences, working with texts that are at their grade level in ways that they will be able to do independently or with a sibling or family member. We really wanted to think about the engagement of families, but not have to over-rely on that engagement. Students will develop an awareness and automaticity of the routine. And for families with multiple children, this routine also supports fluency development and can be used by students or children of all ages. So before we go any further, we'd like to pause and invite you to take a poll. And right now, in the distance learning setting that you're in, how often are students currently engaging in fluency practice or fluency work? So if you're at a classroom level, what does this look like in your classroom currently right now? If you're at a district level, think about classrooms across the district or within the district. How often are kids engaging in fluency work now in a time of distance learning? So I'll pause so you can do that. So now you can see the results. So kind of interesting, we've got a lot of variety here. So thinking about this as being a really important thing, hopefully we'll share a routine tonight that will spark some ideas for you or think about what might this look like in your setting. So now I'm going to share what does a 5-day reading practice instructional routine look like and sound like. And our hope is that through walking through this, you'll have ideas of what you might be able to do in your setting. So here's an overview of the 5-day instructional routine. So I invite you to take a minute and read the slide to see what's happening each day. So you'll notice the routine begins with modeled and choral reading, providing students with a model of fluent reading. And throughout the week, students will engage in repeated readings of the text and attend to their word recognition, expression, and automaticity. On day 1, the teacher will model reading with fluency, and students will also participate in a choral read. There's also a comprehension element, so it's really important for students to always know that comprehension is the main goal of reading. On day 2, the teacher and students will engage in echo reading. On day 3, students will be reading aloud to themselves and also receiving feedback, maybe through partner feedback, buddy feedback in reading, or from a parent. On day 4, students will continue to practice reading with repeated readings of the passage and then complete a self-evaluation. On day 4, students will be performing the passage, which can offer teachers assessment information to guide further instruction. We're going to share these ideas using open educational resources, including the Student Achievement Partner Fluency packet, but this routine can also be used with whatever your adopted instructional materials are, and as Meredith mentioned, all of those are free for people to use right now. So we've designed this across 3 platforms, thinking about their asynchronous settings, so interacting with students in real time, asynchronous setting, so platforms are things that teachers can post assignments or lessons for students to access at a later time, such as Google Classroom, Seesaw, or other technology platforms like those. There are also students with limited or no technology, and that refers to environments with either no access to devices, as well as environments with no access to Wi-Fi. And this platform includes distributing paper and pencil packets or having access to students over the phone through voice call or voicemail systems. Something we found really interesting as we were thinking about this was that research from the Pew Research Center from February 2019 says that 96% of U.S. adults owned a cell phone. And the statistics includes mobile phones that are not considered smartphones, but also smartphones. So thinking about in our work, we've taken cell phone use into consideration and included ways to engage via cell phone, as well as options for those without cell phone access. So in many cases, teachers are incorporating more than one of these platforms into the distance learning curriculum. For example, some teachers may push out assignments through Google Classroom, but also have weekly Zoom sessions with students. So everything that we're going to describe, we will show across all 3 platforms so that the experiences students get are the same in terms of they're equitable. All students are practicing choral reading or modeled reading or repeated readings. It just looks different across the 3 settings. So we're going to start by looking at day 1 across the 3 platforms to get a sense of the student experiences and consistency in outcomes across those 3 platforms. So notice within each platform, the students start by having the passage read, model read to them, and then choral reading with the teacher. This might be a synchronous experience like this webinar, where I read the passage to you and then we read it together chorally. It could be in an asynchronous setting. I might pre-record myself reading the story. You listen to the story in its entirety, then play the recording again, this time chorally reading. We've also thought about limited or no technology platforms in a few different ways. As I mentioned earlier, many students have access to phones, and we found a way to push this out through phones using Desmos, which is actually usually used by middle and high school math teachers, but we found lots of opportunity with Desmos in this work as well, and we're going to share that a bit later. This could also look like a phone call from the teacher or pre-recorded outgoing message on the teacher's classroom phone extension, or parents or older siblings modeling the reading to students. Following the modeled reading and choral reading, students independently engage in repeated reading, and this happens daily. Students are reading aloud the text on day 1, and they answer some comprehension questions. So the first day is the most robust, and what we're really hoping you notice is that the student experience, while it looks different across the 3 settings, all of these things lead to the same outcome. So I want to talk a little bit about each element and why it's part of the routine. So we start with modeled and choral reading for students to hear what fluent reading sounds like and to have an opportunity to practice alongside a fluent reader. We also know that choral reading helps both proficient and struggling readers. So we'll be talking briefly about each element, and at the end of the webinar, we'll share a list of resources. And one of those resources includes a description of each component and the research that supports it. So if some of these routines are new to you, this might be something of interest.
Before we read the passage passage, I want to go over some key vocabulary. The first is a lake, which is a large body of water that has land around it. Second is a splash. The definition of a splash is to make water move in a noisy way. Maybe you make a splash when you do a cannonball into a pool. And lastly, fine time, which means a good time. When we celebrate our classmates' birthdays at school, we have a fine time because we're celebrating our friend, we're happy, we're having fun, so it's a good time. So boys and girls, what we're going to do next is called choral reading. So as I read the passage again, I want you to read it out loud with me. So you're going to follow along and read what I'm reading. Are you ready? All right. Anne and Frank by Unknown. One day, Anne and Frank went to the lake with Rover.
After doing choral reading, the students will reread the passage 2 times. Once, and then twice. And then they can be asked comprehension questions at the end.
So what you just saw and heard was within Desmos, and that's a platform that students can experience through a smartphone or other technology devices such as Chromebooks or laptops. And that's an example of what choral reading might look and sound like in an asynchronous setting. So now I'm going to move to day 2. And day 2 includes echo reading with a more fluent reader. So that might be the teacher, a parent, or sibling, along with students independently engaging in repeated reading. So echo reading is when students echo the teacher. So to start echo reading, the teacher will first read the whole passage with students following. And after that, the teacher will read a section of the text and stop so that children get a turn to read the same section. Echo reading is especially beneficial and supportive of new or insecure readers because it takes the passage you're reading for fluency practice and it chunks or segments it. So now we're going to show an example of what echo reading might look like and sound like in an asynchronous setting. And to frame the video before we show it, we'll hear the teacher first explaining what echo reading is and how to participate. And thinking about that is something really important as we move to distance learning. How do we support students to know how to participate in the experiences that may be new, but are definitely new in this distance learning setting? So similar to choral reading, this will be important at the beginning of implementing a process like this. But after a few weeks, students will be familiar with how to participate and how to engage in echo reading. We know there are a variety of asynchronous platforms being used. We're showing just one way that that platform can be used. So now we'll watch the video.
So today, boys and girls, we're going to be doing something called echo reading. This means that I'm going to read a line from our passage out loud, and then afterwards, you're going to echo me by reading the exact same line. Let's practice it together. So when you see the font in black like this, that means that it's my turn to read. So I would say, Anne and Frank by Unknown. And when you see the slide look like this, with the red font and then your turn in the corner, that means that it's your turn to read. So you would read Anne and Frank by Unknown. All right, so let's get ready to echo read. Remember, it's your turn to read when you see the font in red and when you see that little picture in the corner saying your turn. All right. Anne and Frank by Unknown. One day, Anne and Frank went to the lake with Rover.
So our goal in putting the video in was just to share with you some ideas of what this might look like and sound like across settings. So now we're going to move to day 3. And on day 3, students engage in peer reading. So within peer reading, one student reads while the other follows along, and then they switch roles. And this can happen in all of the platforms. It can happen live. Students can listen to each other's recorded readings through asynchronous settings, or they could read the passage to a friend or family member. So notice the option to get feedback here. The feedback could be from teachers, peers, or family members, and it looks a bit different across the platforms. In a synchronous setting, students might read aloud and the teacher can listen in on particular students, for example, using the mute feature on something like Zoom. Or students can read to peers in breakout rooms. In an asynchronous setting, students can record themselves reading and listen to the recording of peers. Without technology, students can also read the passage to a family member or stuffed animal. So again, all the students are practicing reading aloud with an option of getting feedback. So the experiences are the same, the outcomes are the same, it just looks a little bit different. So now Katie is going to take over and talk about day 4.
Hi, everyone. So on day 4, students again do repeated reading out loud, and on this day they complete a self-evaluation. As you consider what repeated reading might look like, as you consider what repeated reading and self-evaluation or reflection might look like and sound like, this might be a place to think about pedagogy and learning platforms. Do you want additional time to listen to particular students read? Then maybe a synchronous setting makes sense. Is your synchronous time with students at a premium? Would you get the same outcomes from an asynchronous experience? These are things to consider. Repeated reading involves reading the same text multiple times across several days, allowing students additional practice opportunities. Thinking about the self-evaluation component, students might reflect on how their reading has improved over the week, words that they've now learned, or how they're attending to punctuation as they read. This gives students an opportunity to think about the progress they're making and build on their awareness of themselves as readers. The final day includes students reading aloud to an audience. The audience could be the teacher, peers in a breakout room, peers that listen to a digital recording, or even a family member. Performing the passage for others creates another opportunity for additional feedback, commendation, and teacher assessment. We've developed a parent resource to go with the model, and that resource includes specific day-to-day guidelines for students and parents or family members. The resource will be shared in English and Spanish. We wanted to keep the routine and communication as simple as possible. The focus is on what students are doing and how families might engage. We also see this as being part of the parent engagement opportunities teachers and schools are facilitating, such as parent Zooms and digital back-to-school nights. In addition to family engagement and a parent resource for students in a no-tech environment and phone calls for limited tech environments, there's also the option to send reading practice lessons or activities to students using Desmos, as we mentioned earlier. The Desmos activity can be texted to families who have access to a smartphone. Desmos does not require Wi-Fi. However, it does use data, which is something to keep in mind. The video of the training is provided at the end of the webinar with other resources. The video explains how to create a reading practice lesson in Desmos for students in a tech-free remote environment, which is defined here as no access to computers or tablets and no access to Wi-Fi. We're going to pause here. Using the blue group chat widget, please share what you see is one benefit this model offers to your students or students in general. I see flexibility, equity, access. So take a moment and look over some of the other answers in the group chat. So the group chat is still firing away, but thank you all so much for sharing. We'll now hear perspectives of this instructional routine from a site administrator and first grade teacher. First, we'll hear from Dr. Dwayne Cox, who's the site administrator at Ray Elementary in the Newport Mesa Unified School District.
I think you may be on mute, Dwayne.
Okay, I figured it out. I apologize. My name is Dwayne Cox, and I serve as a principal in Newport Mesa Unified School District. Proud to be here this evening. Really an odd to be here with the Liebens. Yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience as an administrator in a Title I low-income school. And I imagine so many of us are experiencing similar things. And I think some of the things that we're recognizing is, first of all, this huge challenge in regard to technology. And first of all, getting our students connected with technology, but then making these decisions like Dr. Garino brought up, which these decisions about how do you provide instruction with such a short amount of time that you're being provided in the day, moving from a 6-hour day to, a Zoom, a synchronous experience with children, which might be far, far less, something, extremely short. So what do you spend your time on? And so these ideas around fluency and repeated reading and modeled reading and practice feedback are so important for us to camp out in and recognize that that's a place where we're going to get so much bang for our buck. And so with that, we recognize too, as Dr. Garino brought up, just this concern we have about students actually having the ability to be online in a Zoom. And so what can we do with other technologies and how might we use phones? Through Desmos and others, we can get our parents to use their phone, possibly. Ideally, we want them to be on a synchronous format, but we may not be able to achieve that. I think something that came up this evening and maybe we didn't talk as much about tonight, but just this idea of how do we provide students with feedback, and these pieces like Flipgrid or things like Seesaw or other programs or platforms that our teachers can use may provide that opportunity to be integrated in this model. One of the things that we've been really thinking a great deal about at our school is this idea of giving our teachers experience in these platforms, not necessarily showing them how to teach in this way, but what is it like to be a learner with these platforms? And so even this presentation this evening, is there a place to provide our teachers an opportunity to do this and to actually be like a student and experience this? Because this kind of distance learning we're doing right now is not something that our colleagues have ever experienced as a learner. And so quite possibly a step for all of us is to think about, how do I, first of all, get a vision for teaching and learning what you're doing right now, but then how do I experience learning in this setting? And then how do I provide for my teachers an opportunity to actually experience this and then learn from one another? And finally, just this idea of collaboration too. In the traditional setting, we valued collaboration tremendously. However, how do we move teachers so that they are still getting that opportunity to bounce ideas off one another and contribute to one another's thinking and collaborate? So those are just some of the things that we've been thinking about, and a lot of what Dr. Garino shared she's been doing at our school. And it's exciting to see our teachers continue to be learners in this distance learning format. And in a moment you're going to hear Mrs. Megan Merrick, who's a teacher at our school as well. And she's just amazing and has provided opportunity for not only in her classroom, but with her colleagues to try these things with their students. So at this time, I'll introduce to you Mrs. Merrick.
Hi. Let's see. I'm Megan Merrick, first grade teacher at Ray Elementary. Our first grade team is using this process. We are all doing it a bit differently depending on our schedules, but we know that all of our first graders are receiving the same reading practice. What's even more settling at this time is that this practice is something that we would be doing if we were in the classroom setting. So we know we're delivering the curriculum they would have had. We are using the decodable readers from our Wonders curriculum. So on the first day, we record and post a screencastify of us reading the story on our Google Classroom. Then at our Zoom meeting, we go over the expectations that they are to listen to the story one time and then replay the screencastify and read along with us. Then they are expected to open a separate slide of the story and read it 2 more times by themselves. After they read, they open a Google Doc and answer some comprehension questions about the story. And if that's not within their technological capabilities, on the second day, we do our echo reading in small groups. We're lucky enough to have the help from our reading intervention team. So they join in on our Zoom call, and we break out into breakout rooms where we have the students take turns echo reading. I enjoyed this format because of the small group setting, and I know the students are actually reading as opposed to them reading independently at home. On the third day, we post the story again on Google Classroom with the instructions that they are to record themselves reading the story on Seesaw. The students were really excited to do this. I've seen a few students post this afternoon, and I can tell that this will be a great platform to track student progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much to this evening's presenters. We have quite a bit of time for questions. We did receive quite a few questions in our Q&A during this evening's session. So there's one question I actually would like to pose to Meredith and David.
Okay.
Meredith, there's a question that we received on fluency for older children. I think that would be a good question to answer. So many teachers, grades 6 through 12, do not see the value of fluency practice. What research supports this practice for older students, and what are the benefits students gain?
So the research base, I think I'm best off directing people to the research in our fluency resources on Achieve the Core, because it would take too much time. It would take up too much time now. But fluency, there were lots of questions that sort of clustered here. People were asking, why aren't we handling comprehension in this, tonight? This is reading fluently at grade level is a precursor to independent reading for comprehension. Students cannot comprehend. They can't free up brain power to comprehend until they are reading fluently and automatically and retrieving words orally, retrieving the words they know from their long-term memory. That happens. There's other components to that, but reading fluency touches on lots of them in the ways they talked about at the top of the hour. And so it is a precursor, a prerequisite, if you will, for reading comprehension. So older students who aren't fluent, I don't know, truthfully, if you can reach through the phone lines remotely and get them to see the value of becoming fluent while they're at home. That's just tricky relationally to not. I know how to do it when kids are in school with us, but for teachers of older students, I think you got to present the research and question. And what we do, and it really affects people quickly, is ask a group of teachers on a Zoom call. And I did do this recently remotely for something that was supposed to be in person. Ask them to pretend, to put themselves on mute, put something up on a slide, and have them pretend to be disfluent for 30 seconds. Then throw up the simplest question, a right there comprehension question, and push them to answer it on the next slide without being able to see that text. Those teachers will see that it matters if you're fluent or not, even pretend fluent. So the question I saw asked about faculty and teachers. So convincing kids, I think, is beyond what we can do right now. But convincing your colleagues that it's important, I would try that experiment. Let them pretend to be fluent for a minute and see how it feels, and realize that they didn't do anything but stumble, and their brain didn't think about meaning at all. So that's my answer. Back to mute.
Thank you, Meredith. This next question, I'm going to pose it to Jody. Is it best to have the same text read for a week and practice different skills from the passage, or is having a different story each day practice one or two skills better?
So I'm not sure I have the answer to what is better. The way that we were envisioning this is we were thinking about students would work with one or two texts across the week to really focus on reading practice and becoming fluent with the different experiences. But I don't know, Meredith and David, if you have other thoughts that you want to add to that?
Yep, I came back on too. So repeated reading of the same text has a research base. Repeated reading of several texts cycled through also does, but the idea is to be able to have that model of accurate reading is critical. You can't ask students to read it cold. They need to hear it accurately, practice it with that accuracy and coaching. That's the choral reading point before they go off. And if they can do that, they can read grade level text even if they're several grades below. So either one works, but they need to stick with the text for a few repeated readings where they are successfully reading it, accurately and successfully reading it, because the point is for them to experience that prosody that David talked about, that fluid reading, so that they feel successful as readers. So you could have a few in play and go back to them, or you could do the one a week. There's a research base for both. But for simplicity, I like the way that was presented here tonight. Ease of access, ease of implementation. That's what we're actually offering parents inside their own home. And not much of what we're doing right now feels easy to parents.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Jody. This next question is from Megan. If you could you repeat the information that you discussed about the Google Classrooms? I think the audio went out a little bit while you were speaking. And also in terms of Fluency in Google Slides, do you post the Fluency passage on Google Slides, or do you attach a link to Classroom for students to follow and read?
Okay, so basically day one, is that what I'm cut out on? So I post on Google Classrooms, we post us model reading on a Screencastify. I went through and I made our decodable readers were available online, and so I made them into Google Slides. It was pretty laborious, but it will be worth it in the end. So that's what we post. It's not a single page. It's like a little mini book for them to read. So we have that where we Screencastify and we're reading, and then it's a separate post with a separate slide where we're not reading, and that's where they can go through and read. So it's almost like a digital book. And then there's another teacher, first grade teacher. She created these Google Docs of comprehension questions and put text boxes in where the students then can type in the answers in the text box. Does that answer the question?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Megan. And I think this question, I'm going to direct it towards Dwayne, but any of our presenters could answer it. Our school uses Ready for our main reading resource. This book has students read a new passage each day. What do you recommend for us to implement if our book isn't giving us the same passage?
I could take this. I would recommend that you ignore the directions that are made for the classroom use and modify to something really simple for at-home use like this.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. This user says, I work primarily with K through 2. Are you using decodable text geared toward a specific skill, i.e. controlled vowels, etc., for the class across the board, or are you using a leveled text? And I'm going to direct this question towards Jody and Katie.
So for K2, we were thinking a lot about this connecting with decodables. Of whatever skills you're working on. Like I'm working with some particular students right now that are working on the AR sound, so maybe the decodable that works with the R control vowels for those particular kids that week really makes sense. So really what would offer students practice with what you're working on with them is how we had conceptualized it. I don't know if that answers the question.
And I would argue, again, for the at home, that it could be things that are really fun to read, like riddles and poems, silly poems and stuff that's fun and the kids are motivated to read too. So, but decodable and wordless even little kids would like to read.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to say thank you to all of our presenters this evening. I hope everyone enjoyed the topic. I just want to direct everyone's attention to this slide. It is a slide of all of the resources that are included in the resource widget. So you can also click the links here to access them. You can join our network. You can access the Google Certified Educator, Screencastify certification, etc. All of the different resources that we discussed throughout this evening. And just a reminder, make sure that you join our network. It provides you with access to a national network of educators, and you can connect with different educators across a state network as well. You can keep up to date on free resources, upcoming SAP webinars for professional learning opportunities, job postings, and so much more. And you also could be part of creating new tools and resources in partnership with SAP. So you could reach us on different social media platforms. You could reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, or even Pinterest. And please feel free to join us next month for our May webinar, Math Resource Fixer-Uppers with Jason Zimba. You could register here using this link. It will be May 6th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, I'd like to say thank you so much to our presenters, and thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you again. Bye.